So, Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. So, we're going to start with a few things, just asking you general questions, introduce yourself, and then we're going to get into the more in-depth questions about your experience and your current practice. So, could you just give me, make a quick introduction of who you are and what your current practice is about?
I'm a child and adolescent psychotherapeutic counsellor, and I have a small private practice, and I also work with homeless young people between the ages of 16 and 25.
Okay. And so you practice as a child and adolescent psychotherapist. How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing this since 2011.
Okay, that's great. And how did you get into this?
My background is in education, and I was a secondary school teacher since I left university. And during that time, I was a form tutor, and I was given the opportunity to teach personal, social, health education. And I've always been interested in people. And at university, I studied human geography, which looks a lot at kind of motivations and things that cause people to do certain things and interact in their environment. So I suppose starting from a very wide level, I was always interested in people and society. And then when I was given this opportunity to teach personal, social and health education, it meant that I was able to work with my students in a way that was different from being a geography teacher. And it meant that the children and the young people would be able to come to me to talk about some of their kind of social and emotional problems. And I found I didn't really have the skills to be able to deal with their problems. And I found that rather than being, my interest had changed from kind of society and people interacting with their environment to more on an individual basis, where it was individuals interacting with their social environment. And so that was probably where my interest came from.
Right.
Originally.
So you were a teacher, you discovered you wanted to help people at a different level. So how was the decision to go from, like, I'm a teacher? Did you go back to university then?
I was teaching in Athens at the time, and there was quite limited opportunities. So I had investigated an opportunity to do a master's in counselling, but I didn't really know very much about it at the time. And my school that I worked at had suggested that if I did an open university course, that they might help fund it, which spurred on my enthusiasm even more. As it happened, counselling courses, you need to have quite a large amount of practical experience.
Yes.
and opportunities.
It's a hands-on
That's
course,
right.
yes.
And you need to have supervisors who are qualified in order to be able to lead you and guide you as well. And this wasn't available in Greece. So it got to a point in my career where I really felt that I wasn't interested so much in teaching anymore. I'd been doing the same job for many years and it had grown stale. And I thought that it was time for a change. So I returned to England and retrained.
Right, so you left your job in Greece. You were working in Greece at the time, came back to England and started studying.
Yeah.
That was a kind of a sharp decision,
yes.
Sharp pivot. Change country, change career.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a sharp decision in the sense that it took a long time to evolve and manifest. But yes, it was certainly a big change in my life. It was a turning point in my life, yeah.
Great. And do you remember if there was anything, so you were thinking about doing this move, was there anything holding you back for that?
Well, I had my life in Greece. I had, my family was there, I had friends there, I had lived there for 13 years. My house is there, and so it meant that I had to give up a lot in order to retrain. So yeah, so I just made the decision that I wanted to do this for myself, and
right.
and I sacrificed the rest.
Okay, so you mentioned you were working with kids and you were working with young people, let's call them more professionally, young people you were seeing that some of them had some issues that you wanted to be able to help, and you said you felt you didn't have the tools. So do you remember a particular key point when you said, okay, that's it, that's what I want to do because I don't feel enough empowered to help these people?
I don't know that there's one particular example that comes to mind, but I can think of a few examples of working with 11-year-old and 12-year-old children who had friendship problems, and their parents would get involved. And I found also that some children, when they had knocks, socially, when they had knocks, or that some of them lacked resilience and able to bounce back from that in a way that was helpful to them, or they really suffered, and I felt that I'd like to give them an opportunity, or to be able to offer them a space where they could build their self-esteem and really develop their sense of self, that they were individuals who were likable and were worthy of having friends and having good things around them. So there were a few instances where I had, particularly girls would come to me with different problems. They were friendship problems, and some girls were worried about body image, and some girls stopped eating, and there were fears around them developing anorexia, and some went on to develop anorexia.
Wow.
And so I think it was probably a collection of issues that came to my attention when the young girls wanted to talk to somebody about their problems, and
yes.
And I didn't know what to do other than offer my ear and compassion. I didn't know what else to do. And there was also an issue around kind of limited services for English speakers within Greece and the school that I worked at.
Yes,
as well.
of course, yeah, I understand. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so what was your biggest challenge you had in order to? So you took this decision. You came back here, or even before you came here. Was there a particular big challenge you found that you had to overcome?
Well, I have this little devil that sits on my shoulders called nagging doubt, and he talks into my ear quite a lot about not being smart enough or good enough or able enough to be able to do things that sometimes I feel that I might like to try. So I suppose, as a counsellor, you spend years in psychotherapy yourself, going over issues and processing things that have happened within your life, and so nagging doubt was a friend that often attended my psychotherapy sessions with me. So I think that was probably one of the friends that I had to work through our relationship with.
All right, great. Okay, and was there one person that had most influence in your life about this business, this career decision I'm talking about?
Well, when I was teaching, I had a mentor she was about 15 years older than me, and she doesn't have any training in therapeutic skills or in counselling skills at all. But her way of being was such that she could put others above herself, and the interest of others and positive regard towards others was always present. And she was my mentor, and I often thought that she was amazing, and how it would be to be someone like her. And she organised. She was the head of the primary school in the school that I worked at. I was a secondary school teacher, but she was the head of the primary school, and she arranged some in-service training where she brought two counsellors from the UK, and it was in the beginning, so this was in kind of early 2000s, where the whole concept of emotional intelligence was being kind of brought into the public.
Yes,
and so it was her that first introduced me to this. And I worked in a private school where the school was very much focused on results and achievement, and really pushing the students to get us the highest grades as possible. And many of our kids they were not highly academic, but they had strengths in other areas. So I really became interested in this idea of emotional intelligence. And it was her that introduced that to me by giving me this opportunity to go to this training with counsellors and learn about this, and then practice it with her.
Very nice. Okay, and is there, still talking about your career decision and your starting your practice, is there anything you would change in your past?
No.
Great. Okay. Can you give us a very quick explanation about how your therapy works?
Well, I'm an integrative therapist, which means that I take...
Integrative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which means that I take interventions and tools from different approaches depending on the needs of my client. At the heart of my training was arts-based. It was arts-based and play-based course where I worked initially with younger children, and the basis of my work is to do with is person-centered therapy, which is you offer particular conditions to your clients, and these conditions help to facilitate healing and personal growth. Right.
Okay, I guess many of the people watching this might not have an idea what you just said. The simple thing is, obviously I work with lots of psychotherapists and psychologists, and each of them work with a number of different tools. So it could be CBT, it could be psychodynamic. However, I have a few ideas about what CBT is. Nonetheless, it would be extremely, I think, if I was a parent with a child who needs your help or the help of someone in your position, I would be very curious to understand. Obviously, the parents are not present in a session. Usually, they might come along for a few minutes, but in general, you're working with a child or a young person one-to-one. So, a child is, let's say, an 8 years old, 9 years old young girl comes in and says, "My friends don't like me." How does the conversation go from there?
So, the conversation. So with an 8-year-old, I suppose, unless a child actually came forward and was very, very explicit about what they felt the problem was.
Yes.
And often when while I was still training, I did a placement that then went on to be paid work in a primary school, and very often I had children of 6 and 7 who were coming to see me, and they didn't really know why they were coming to see me, because they were often referred by their parents and their teachers.
Yes.
And the referral would come because there was often behavioural issues, or there might be an issue within the family that the child would need to process in some sort of healthy way that wasn't damaging. So I had children who came from families where there was domestic abuse, or families that struggled, high levels of kind of unemployment, not being able to support or feed their children properly, and this would mean that the last thing that a child often can focus on is their education when their basic needs aren't being met. Right. So with very young children, they wouldn't be so explicit with their problems.
Right.
Maybe with the older ones, they might say to you, I'm having problems, and this girl I fell out with this girl, or I fell out with this boy, or I don't like my teacher.
Yeah.
And then if it was explicit like that, then I would start to question what happened, and the idea behind it is that the therapist shows unconditional positive regard and acceptance for whatever the child brings to you in the room, and that as well as that, you're showing this child that they're likable, and affirming that the way that they experience the world is real and all right.
Okay.
With a younger child, it tends to be done through play. So because they may not have the skills to be able to be explicit in what's going on in their life,
yes.
we have tools like a sand tray or drawing equipment, and we might ask them to tell a story in the sand, and then often their internal subjective world comes out through their play, and you can work with them using metaphor, so using puppets and characters to have discussions, so that it's not between yourself and the child, but between two characters.
Right.
And especially if a child has experienced trauma, you can work with them in a way where they can process that trauma without it necessarily re-traumatizing the child, because there's a little bit of distance between them.
You don't want to just go and dig the trauma out, and so he or she has to
going in hand-fisted in these things is unlikely to get you anywhere.
And so I understand that as a part of you are asking questions and you're helping this issue to come out. So how does the next process, for them to become resilient to that, or to overcome the trauma, if there is, maybe I'm speaking gibberish, I don't know exactly. Luckily, I never experienced having a psychologist or psychotherapist. So for me, being a coach, I always look at, we understand there is a problem, we look at the solution, we move forward toward the solution, ignoring the problem. I do appreciate if you have psychological issues, you have been traumatized, or you're experiencing difficulties of that kind, probably you have to stay on the problem a bit. Yeah.
So if a child is brought to me, so let me think of an example. A child is referred to me because there's domestic violence at home, and this child in school is tearful. Every time the teacher says something that the child interprets as a criticism, they cry. They don't want to go out and play with their friends anymore. They become withdrawn. So these would all be red flags to a teacher and a parent. Mm-hmm. So they would hopefully search out help. And so I might have a child referred to me because the child is not happy in school, is not thriving in some way. And the child, him or herself, might not necessarily know exactly what's wrong.
Of course.
But I wouldn't be able to express that. But what I would focus on then is not necessarily that mum and dad have problems at home, but more about what's kind of going on in that child. So there might be issues to do with self-esteem and not being heard, and what it was like to be frightened, and what it was like to be out of control and not be able to control situations. And then as time goes on, often other things come out of the process, and you might find that there are cultural or parenting styles that have impacted on the child that affect the child's sense of self and how they understand themselves. So you work with that. The outcome that we want is that we have a happy child or young person that has the skills and the ability to be able to do well in their lives, to respond to knocks. So when their teacher or their lecturer tells them that they haven't done as well as they hoped, that rather than it being a catastrophe in their lives, that they're able to dust themselves off and say, okay, well, now I know what I need to do next time to improve. Or in relationships, that they start to understand that they are whole, likable people, and they have a sense of self, that I'm okay inside. And if you feel that you're okay inside, other people can't do that much damage to you. So if you're rejected, you still feel you're okay inside, but something has to there's other things going on.
Yeah.
And that's a much more healthier way to relate to others.
Great. This is exactly what I wanted to know. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So you already told me what the typical outcome is. So do you have a typical client? You mentioned the child and adolescent that already slots you into a particular market or demographic of market. So what is child and adolescent for you? How range, age? Do you work? And also, do you have any gender bias in terms of like more female, more male, more male?
Interestingly, in my whole career as a psychotherapist, I've actually had more young men and boys come to see me than girls. But I don't know whether this is just luck or if there is something more to that. I think one of the most common presentations for young people and teenagers are problems concerning esteem, sense of self, and also anxiety.
Right.
So I find that anxiety, particularly in children from the age of 11 to and adolescents up to the age of 24, they do struggle. The people that have come to see me struggle with anxiety.
So anxiety, we intend they always think about something in particular. And a little problem becomes a very big problem in general.
Yeah, in some cases it is this catastrophizing where something small that someone else might be able to put out of their mind as an unimportant thought, that they can't let it go, and that they rethink it over and over and they ruminate, and this causes them anxiety. Some of them are like that. Some of them it's more inhibiting in their lives. The anxiety means that they're unable to participate in parts of their lives. I've had children that haven't been able to accept awards when they've done well because the thought of having to stand up in front of people or get praise in front of someone is too much to bear. Children who panic about being late to places, and this causes a lot of stress for families and a lot of upset for the child if there's traffic on the road and this type of thing. So they have, and then the other extreme, I've worked with young people who kind of have generalized anxiety, which means their anxiety level is really high all the time and permeates all areas of their lives, which again is very inhibiting and causes distress, all the way to mental illnesses such as OCD, which can mean that people are stuck in routines or rituals for hours.
OCD stands for obsessive compulsive
disorder. Yeah.
Right. Okay, that's good, because you experts, you professionals of this have a lot of acronyms, and there are lots of acronyms for the diseases and lots of acronyms for the techniques you use. And many people, for me, I'm familiar with CBT, I'm familiar with OCD, I'm familiar with lots of things that come known standard with lots of practitioners we work with, like ADHD and this one. But when you talk to a person from the street, most of the times they are not
it's just
familiar with all this
industry jargon.
Great. Okay. Can you give us an idea, a typical set of treatments? How many sessions do you normally see someone for, if there is a typical?
Well, I'm trained in long-term relational therapy, so the type of therapy that I prefer to offer is long-term, which means I would hope to see somebody for about 6 months, up towards a year. However, this is within private practice. There are financial constraints for the parents that for the children that I work with. So the NHS offers 6 weeks of CBT often, or 6 weeks of art therapy, and so I use this as a basis. So when I have a new client come to see me, and often parents or the young people themselves say, how long is this going to take? And I often say that I would recommend that we would do 6 weeks of sessions, and that would be 1 hour a week. and then evaluate, what's worked, what they'd still like to work on, if they'd like to continue with me, and then we would move forward probably for another 6 sessions. And then they'd have opportunities to evaluate, and it's kind of, there's a get out clause on the way that after 6 weeks, if they didn't feel that they wanted to continue working, or they didn't feel that this was for them, then they would be able to get out. But I'm very honest when I have my initial consultation with a new client, that it's not a quick fix.
No.
Talking therapies aren't a quick fix.
No.
And depending on the individual, it could, if you're lucky, it could take 6 weeks. But often people come to psychotherapy after having experienced personal distress for a long period of time. And if you've had a year of suffering from anxiety or depression, it's not going to disappear in 6 hours of talking. If it was, you could. So realistically, I try to tell my clients from the outset that we start with 6 weeks, but it could take a number of months or even up to a year.
Yeah. And I heard also from other practitioners I work with, there is also an issue that somebody might come for an initial thing, and as you start practicing, as you start with the sessions, other things will come out in the surface. So sometimes you are told that you're going to be treating someone for a mild depression, and then you somehow come out that the depression is caused maybe by a child trauma, which was not even in the radar when you started discussing
Absolutely. But I think also as a psychotherapist, you expect that once you start unpacking the box, that all sorts of things are going to come out.
Right.
And you need to be competent enough to be able to contain the fact that it's not as... depression is never simple.
No.
There's often lifelong experiences that have led to that place, and often when you start to unpick and unpack some of the big feelings that your clients are experiencing, they're going to bring out some huge life experiences that have had massive effects on their sense of self and their moods and the way that they see the world and the way that they experience the world. So yes, absolutely. And I think this is to be expected.
Great. Okay. Now, I think this is fantastic. All this explanation is extremely useful for me to understand, and also I hope for people watching and listening to this program. So let's move a bit about yourself. Do you have routines in your business life, in your professional life, in terms of like a daily or weekly routine about your practice?
Daily or weekly routines about my practice? You mean in terms of my program or my timetable?
Yes, or in terms of you do something particular, apart from running your sessions at particular days of the week, which I believe is a standard practice for most of practitioners. If in order to keep your practice up and running, you do something in a particular day of the week or something like that.
I mean, in order to support your practice and to support you within your work, we have an obligation and a responsibility to our clients and to ourselves to make sure that we have supervision, and ideally to have supervision weekly so that we can kind of work through. It's often very good practice for therapists also to have personal therapy, so that if clients bring along experiences that trigger things that have happened in your own life, that these have often, you've worked through this stuff yourself, so that you're not reactive when they present some of their issues or experiences. So supervision is important, and I would say, certainly to support my practice, this is something that I do, and I have an excellent supervisor. And I think, within my practice as well, I'm a counsellor and a psychotherapist, but, I also try to promote healthy living. So that means, to encourage people to do physical activity, to encourage them to have a routine within their lives, to sleep well, to eat healthy, to try and reduce caffeine and not go over the top when it comes to alcohol for the older young people that I work with. So, and I try as best I can to try and implement that in my own life as well.
Great. Do you do particular exercises to keep yourself in shape mentally and physically?
I'm interested in mindfulness, and although I'm not interested particularly I'm not a Buddhist, or don't have a particular interest in the spiritual side of things. I am interested in meditation, as neuroscience kind of developments in neuroscience show now that it has a wonderful calming effect on the brain.
Right.
So I do mindfulness myself, and I have a personal trainer which I like to work out with weekly.
Right.
And I think when I finished training to be a psychotherapist, I felt like I had probably gone through about, from before I started training until the end of the time that I trained, I had probably had about 15 years worth of personal therapy myself. And
wow.
I thought, I don't want to do any more personal therapy for now. I want to do something different. Yeah. And so I decided to get a personal trainer. And at the moment, that's kind of my therapy. I like to be able to go there and to work out. And he pushes me to my limits, and I come away feeling relaxed and satisfied that I've achieved something. And that means that I have energy to continue. So it's a kind of personal self-care, I suppose.
Okay. Where do you see yourself in 3 years as far as your practice is concerned?
Well, I would like the practice to grow in such a way that I would be able to reduce the hours that I spend working for the charity that I work for, with homeless young people.
Yes.
I don't want to stop doing that altogether, because that's been an incredible experience for me, working with a client group that I wouldn't usually have access to.
Yes.
And it's also meant that I've been able to learn quite a lot about myself in terms of crisis management and being able to cope with very, very complex, difficult situations. And so it's been an incredible experience. And also the fact that until I finished retraining in this country, I had never worked in this country either. So it's meant that I've been able to have a greater understanding of the social care system within the UK and the NHS, which I didn't have very much knowledge of before, because I had all of my working life I had spent in Greece, and then before that I had grown up in the Middle East. So coming to England to study and work as a mature student and now working meant that I had a lot to learn when I came here. But back to your question, so where would I like to see myself in 3 years' time?
Yes.
I'd like the practice to grow in such a way that I would be able to reduce the hours that I do for the charity, and I also have an intention to specialise in anxiety disorders, and particularly in OCD, and I have plans next year to do a course at the Cognitive Behavioural Therapy Centre in Oxford, and then really kind of focus on working with clients in private practice who have OCD.
Great. So we're going to have to interview you again once you have this OCD specialization. Do you remember your proudest moment in your psychotherapy career?
I don't know about my proudest moment in my psychotherapy career in terms of an outcome with a client, because often, as a therapist, what we hope for is that our clients won't need us anymore, which is often, it's kind of it works in it's kind of contradictory to business, because in business, I suppose we want to keep our clients so that we can keep on offering our services. But as a psychotherapist, you're offering your services so that your client doesn't need you anymore.
Yes.
And but then often when a client decides, or a parent decides that, thank you for your help, we feel much better and we're okay now, or can we do less hours, or can we just see you once a month? I don't know that there's a feeling of pride, because I don't always know all of the reasons why a young person or a child stops working with me, unless I'm the one that's instigated the ending. So often I work with children and young people, and I offer them a particular type of relationship, a therapeutic relationship, while they work with me. And the best that I can hope for is that these children and young people have learned something, and have learned something about themselves, and found that they can cope in difficult and stressful situations, that they are able to process their own emotions and regulate their own emotions, but also that if they don't get anything from me that can be pinpointed like that, what they have experienced is a healthy relationship from someone, and they can take that as a model to use within their lives.
Great. Now, thinking about other people who are thinking or have just completed their studies to become a psychotherapist or counselor like yourself, is there any advice you could give them in order to help them to understand what they need to do in order to start a private practice?
I think in order to start a private practice, what advice would I give them? I think that what advice would I give them? I would encourage them to have as much experience as possible within a structure such as a charity or a school or some sort of organization, so that they can carry those professional practices that they have learnt within that with them into private practice. Because once you're in private practice, it's quite an isolating, and it can be quite a lonely business. So I think it's important that before, I wouldn't encourage somebody that's come straight out of training to go straight into private practice. I would encourage them to work within a charity, to work within a counselling organisation where there is a structure that they can be supported by, first of all. Yeah. And once that they feel comfortable within that and they've developed enough confidence in themselves to then start considering private practice, and then you can take some of the things that you've learnt with you in terms of what to do in safeguarding, procedural things, I think are very important. And also to keep yourself within a community of practitioners and keep yourself in touch with other counsellors and psychotherapists as well. Right. Staying in touch with the people that you studied with is very useful for peer supervision and discussing clients, making sure that you have a very, very supportive supervisor as well. Yeah. And I would probably encourage people to go into private practice to get an accountant, and probably to get some training or do some workshops about marketing their service and how to go about finding clients, because there's a lot of us out there.
Yes. And there is another issue that a lot of people running their own business at the beginning, their own practice, they never run a business as such, which is causing a lot of, they're used to go to work in an organization where they give them clients, but they give them patients to work with, and all of a sudden they have to find them, they have to keep in touch to customer service. There's a lot of issues, a lot of work which a lot of people don't think about, which is the more mundane, the more ordinary business management work, which a lot of people struggle with.
Absolutely. And often people that go into counselling and psychotherapy tend to be kind of people that are interested in other people in this sort of more abstract concepts, and so
they want to help.
Yeah, they want to help, and sometimes that means that that the issue of money is always a tricky issue in psychotherapy, because you do the job because you want to help others, and then of course you also it's your livelihood, so you want to be paid for it too. But sometimes it can be quite hard to kind of offer yourself to this person so that you can help them to discuss their issues, and then you invest quite a lot of your energy and yourself into them, and then at the end of the session to be able to snap out of it, to remind them that they need to pay you.
Fantastic. Well, I would like to thank you very much for your time and your beautiful answers, because they've been extremely useful for me to understand more about what you do, but also I hope for people listening to have a better understanding of what a child and adolescent psychotherapist does.
Thank you.
So thank you for coming to the show, and hopefully we'll speak to you again once you are an OCD expert.
Thank you.
Thank you.